And yeah, thanks everyone for being here today. Um, I'm in Creston, North Carolina, which if you look at a map of North Carolina, the northwest corner, right next to Tennessee and Virginia in the mountains of North Carolina, that's where I'm coming to you from. It's a beautiful sunny day today. Pretty chilly this morning. We were down to 36 Fahrenheit in my little valley, which is a little chilly for this time of year. But again, thanks for being here, and let's look at our agenda for today. There's a lot to cover, and more time than we'll be able to cover in detail. So again, put your questions in the chat, and feel free to follow up afterwards with any lingering questions or thoughts. And what I want to do is go through what my season has been here in our corner of the world, and not to be me focused, but I want you to, as I go through this, you think about your own season as well, and remember that we all sort of have a normal season, if you will, in our area, if anything's normal these days. But and then I'll do a little bit about our sourwood season. That's always kind of a point of interest for folks, and that's something that we specialize in here. And yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into some of the beekeeping for this time of year. What should you be looking at? And then look at some of your questions and give you a little bit of a glimpse into where we are with HiveTracks and what we're thinking about in the future. I mean, most of this presentation is pretty beekeeping centered and heavy, but I'll tie in where HiveTracks matters in this discussion and how it shapes what I do, and then we'll have time for Q&A after that. So first, a little bit, if you haven't met me before, hi, and it's good to meet you and see you. And so just a brief bit of my background. I grew up with bees. My dad had bees in our backyard. I started keeping my own bees in the year 2000, moved to a farm in 2005. And as most of you know, if you get into a space where you can have bees and more bees, you're going to have more bees. And so I just got more bees and moved to about 40 bee hives in 2007, and then 2010 kind of incremented up to kind of full-on sideliner 100 plus hives. We've been running that since then. My son took over most of that in 2017, 18. So we run anywhere from 100 to 150 hives. Next photo is just a nostalgia photo for me. It's my dad in the middle, who I owe a lot of my love for bees and yeah, just nature and understanding how things work. And it's my son on the other side who took over the bee operation as well. So my dad passed away about a year and a half ago, and so I like this in memory of him and in honor of his memory. So all right, let's go on to the reflecting on the season. This time of year, as Danny said, we're kind of drawing down. Fall is approaching quickly. Summer is dwindling. And everybody has kind of a season, unless you're in sort of a tropical area and you don't really have, it's more of a rainy season, dry season kind of thing. But so we go through these cycles, and as beekeepers, if you're a new beekeeper, you don't know what these are in your area, and that's one of the things you should begin to learn and make notes of. Again, this is where HiveTracks will come into play and kind of mark the events of the season, and they're very cyclical. This is sort of an agricultural, nature-based endeavor that we're in with beekeeping, and so it follows kind of the seasons. And so one thing that's important for you is know when the season starts. For us here in the mountains, it's late March, early April. And then when are your flows? Do you have a specific time for a flow? Again, for us here, it's mid to late May, and it's very different than what I call off the mountain. So if you're in North Carolina, we have a coastal region, then we have a Piedmont region and a mountain region, and they're very different sort of seasons, if you will. And so off the mountain, it'll start a month and a half early from what I have, and that's just 30 minutes away. I can get to another season, which actually factors into our beekeeping. We kind of play games with that elevation. But okay, so know when your season begins, know the flows. We have both a spring and a summer flow where we are, which is uh, we're very blessed to have that. A lot of places just have one kind of main honey flows time. The other thing to make note of is when are your dearths, or when are the periods of time when you have just not as much nectar, and maybe even not much nectar at all, because that's going to affect the behavior of the bees and their temperament really, and their you know likelihood of robbing and those sorts of things. So for us, there's a period in mid-June when that happens, and then August, even though there are flowers blooming everywhere, all the good yellow flowers and things start blooming in August, it's still not a very big nectar time. And then when do things end? For me here, that's the end of September, early October, whenever we get our first frost. Although we've been flirting with frost this week, but not really a killing frost. So again, for yourself, how did your season go? What's the flow for you? Um, Keeping records in your HiveTracks is a good way to keep up with what those are. Talk to the beekeepers in your area, of course, right? That's where we get a lot of our knowledge. There's historical context for your area that people have experience with that you don't. And so it's worthwhile to talk and have relationships with the other beekeepers in your area. Some of the challenges in my area, and some of these you may have seen in yours as well, and you've got your own sets of things that made this season different than normal. And again, what is normal? But for us, the weather is always critical to your beekeeping. But when there are wild fluctuations and things that are unusual in the weather patterns, it definitely has an impact on your beekeeping, and whether it's the productivity or the growth of the bees, things like that. So for us, there were quite a few kind of weather ups and downs. It was almost feast or famine with rain. We would have very rainy times and then very dry times. Uh, and it just didn't seem to even out, right? It was just, weeks of dry and then weeks of rain, and just made it challenging for the bees and for us taking care of them. Bears in our area have become more of an issue, having to use bear fences now in places that I didn't before. And I have discovered some things. For those of you in bear areas, you probably already uh, know some of these things, but certainly a bear fence will work, electric fence, but that's a lot of apparatus, right? But strapping your hives, I found, is a good idea with a ratchet strap if you're in those areas. Sometimes that's enough to keep the bears from completely tearing them apart if they're uh, just curious or whatever. But anyway, that's just my learning. One of the lessons learned was that's a good idea to do that. Our flow timings were a little bit odd in some cases this year. Normally the timing is within, a pretty good normal. You can kind of guess and see when the flows are going to start and end. And there were just some unusual flows, either the timing of things that we know that bloom and in our area in sourwood. Um, there was an unusual flow at a weird time that everybody who was going for sourwood kind of saw in their hives, and that was just very interesting. So lessons learned is that beekeeping is always exciting, and there are things to learn every year. It's not just the usual everything goes as planned. As people say, the bees don't read the textbooks. They operate in the environment that they're in and respond accordingly. We as beekeepers need to be flexible to do that as well. So I'll just share a few pictures of things that remind me of the season. And while I'm here, I will suggest this to you as well, is take lots of pictures. Okay. Our phones that we have these days, the images that they take are phenomenal. And it's a great way of documenting what you're doing. And, and so just take lots of pictures. And so we had flooding rains, we had And on June 1st, we had a 37-degree morning. Then on the right picture is one of the bear encounters. And in this case, I did not have the hive strap, which is why I needed to strap them. But the propolis was so tight on these hives that it didn't even break apart. So that was a good thing. All right, next slide. Similar thing. In August, we had another very chilly day. This was August 21st, 42 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, it's supposed to be high summer, at that time. But and then this is my bear fence that has worked so far, and is doing its job. But okay, so that's kind of been our season. Again, interested to hear what your season has been like. If you've got things you want to share in the chat about how things went with you, that would be great. And so I'll take just a few minutes to look at the sourwood. So for those not familiar with sourwood honey production, the sourwood tree is where this honey comes from. It's a bloom on a tree. The tree is sort of an edge growing, not good for timber tree. It grows along the edges of forest. It is in the canopy sometimes, but it's not a very large tree. So in our area, there's been a lot of logging over the years, and the loggers tend to leave the sourwoods because they're not good for, for timber. And so we have a pretty good density right along the Blue Ridge. If you listen to Bob Benny and look at him on YouTube, that's Blue Ridge Honey Company. That's what sourwood is one of their big things that they focus on. And similar for me, that's what I've been doing here since 2008. And I call it chasing sourwood because it's a bit of a yeah, if you followed Bob Benny, and it's a bit of a challenge to get it right. And thankfully for me, I was able to learn from a guy who lived just up the road when I moved into this area. He kept 40, 50 hives, and I learned a lot of the sourwood process from him. He had been keeping bees for 50 years at that time. And but sourwood grows right along the Blue Ridge from Southern Virginia down through Northern Georgia on the Appalachian Mountain chain. That's kind of the sweet spot. There's some other areas kind of over in Tennessee and up in Kentucky, I think, that have some sourwood, but like the place that's famous for it is I'm right in the middle of that. So that just became part of our beekeeping operation. And so this picture image right here, you can see there's fresh white comb. That's stuff that you like to see in a flow. And they're already capping this over. This is actually a good kind of image for our season. For us, it was sort of an average season. It was good. I mean, we made good sourwood honey, but in a really good season, this super would be overflowing with white wax. You can see this is in the center, so they kind of filled it out, but not just overflowing, but good enough, I guess you could say. So let's look at the next slide. And really, this is another picture image from a sourwood yard. And these are the hives. They're supered up. They're making sourwood honey right here. Just for note, we run single deeps in our operation for honey production. So each of those boxes, they've got a single deep, and then a queen excluder, and then honey supers above that. And so for making sourwood honey, and really any honey in particular, if you're going for honey production, these are the components of it. This is not anything new, but a couple of these are critically important if you're going to make sourwood honey. So healthy bees are always in the equation. Location, so finding the place where there's a good amount of sourwood trees. The unique characteristic of sourwood is that it blooms when practically nothing else in the forest is blooming. So it's a forest environment. Most of your trees bloom, in the spring. Sourwood and basswood or linden, those are two kind of summer trees. And so that's why you can get the sourwood separate from other blooming sources. Now we have some invasives and things that are kind of coming into our areas, and that's a whole nother discussion. about those, and I'm kind of watching those. So hopefully they don't get mixed in to our flow. And so location is critical. I had an advantage of this neighbor who'd been doing it for 50 years. And he already knew where the locations were. He shared them with me. He let me share his yards, that sort of thing. He was getting too old to do it anymore, so he was generous in giving me the opportunity to do that. Then timing is critical. As the more you beekeep, you know that there's a time period when you really get a flow, and having your healthy bees in the right place at that time will determine whether you have a good season of honey production or not. And then finally, kind of the knowledge processes of how to move your bees at the right time, how to super them, not super, how to monitor the flow. All these kind of pieces that you learn through experience are part of being successful in sourwood. So let's go to the next slide. And here, I think, yeah, this is, if you've never seen a graph of the weight of a hive, they've been around for 10 plus years now, and I've been using them since the beginning, since before the beginning, really. And this is a typical graph, and this is from our sourwood yard. And this sawtooth shape is your typical weight profile. It's a daily kind of sawtooth. Each day is this is what the flow looks like when you're making honey. And in this case, you can see that it's kind of herky jerky. Some days were really good, some were not so good and went flat, and then it really just cut off. You can see at the top of that the flow just cut off again. So this is a good image to capture our year. The first few days of that, it was super hot, and we finally, in June, this was June, end of June. If you're on the East Coast, you remember that time period. And we had some rain come through and kind of broke the heat. And that's when we had our first big bump in the weight. And then it did better after that. But then we got cool again, and it cut off and started raining in July and killed the rest of that flow. So again, this is an example of a sensor in a hive. What I do with these, and this is a brood minder, I mean, this is not brood minder, this is solution bee scale. And so I just took a screenshot and I added that to my record to get a screenshot of what's going on in the hive at that time. Yeah, so we can go on to the next one now, Danny. Okay, so that's kind of our sourwood picture. And again, that's a whole kind of interesting realm, and we might revisit that in the future if you're interested in hearing more about that or seeing more details on how that works. We're thinking about doing that. So give us feedback on that if you're interested. So now we're to kind of, where are we right now in your beekeeping year? Now, from the geography of what you shared at the beginning, you're from all over, right? So it's kind of hard to say this is exactly where you are, but we all go through the same process. I mean, it's just a sliding window, really, of where you are in your preparations, right? And the things that you need to look for are the same, really, for all of us, right? And I organized this slide. If you don't recognize it, this is the sequence that we use in our inspection in HiveTracks for the things that you need to look for, right? The things that you need to look at when you're inspecting your hive, when you're doing the deep dive, going through the hive. These are the components that you need to look for. Similar, you need to look at each of these areas when you're preparing for winter. We're exiting the honey season, and these are the important components. So how do they factor in this time period? We're kind of in an in-between area right now for most folks. And so space, the bees themselves are reducing the space. Looking at a hive this time of year can be confusing as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that with the queen, but you really want to reduce your space, right? You've pulled honey, or you're going to pull honey. I pulled some honey early. I've still got a hive right here on the other side of the computer here that I've got a super I need to pull off. And so, depending on where you are and your processes, You may still have some honey to pull off. But when you're doing that, you're going to reduce them down to the winter configuration. And that can be different for different folks. Like I said, we try to get down to a single deep where we are, but a single 1.5 double deeps doesn't matter. You're going to get down to what that winter configuration is. So you need to begin that process now. Secondly, how's the food? Clearly, the bees need food for the winter. That's why they store honey in the first place, right? And so how are they doing at this time of year? That's part of when you're inspecting, you're going, okay, we're getting ready to go into winter. They need to have enough carbs. They need the honey. They also need pollen. I don't know about where you are, but where I am, pollen this time of year is usually not an issue. And in fact, it can be too much pollen and you can almost get pollen bound. I've got a picture here in a minute from a crazy hive that I'd never seen before, which when you're into bees for 20 years and you see something you've never seen before, you take note of that as an unusual occurrence. But so they need pollen, but more importantly, perhaps, or the thing that tends to be more iffy this time of year is the food itself. And so, are you going to get a fall flow? Where I am, we sometimes get a goldenrod. It can be as much as a full super's worth. So you're kind of playing games with, are they going to make enough or not? And if they don't, then you need to top them off and feed them to get enough weight. The weight is a point of debate, if you will, but 30 or 40 pounds at least to make it through a winter is a good rule of thumb. Some like to go more. I will say in my years of keeping bees in this area, it's been the rare occurrence that a hive dies by starvation. If they do die of starvation, it's in the spring and they've outstripped, the population grows too fast for what they had stored. So it's not during the winter where they run out of food. It's more in the spring. So, and that's a different sort of management. But anyway, you need to make sure they've got the pollen and they got the honey that they need going into winter. And then perhaps most important, you need bees. You need a lot of bees, a good population of bees going into winter. And so that depends on your queen, of course. Is she laying good patterns? If you've treated for varroa, we'll talk about in the next one, sometimes that will slow down the queen on her laying, but she needs time to recover from that and to start laying some nice clean brood that's varroa free and hopefully disease free. And so again, that's a critical component to just make note of as you're heading into the fall. And then lastly, have you done anything with varroa? Okay, whether you treat or don't treat or how you manage, you need to be aware at least of varroa and understand how they're affecting your hives. And they'll affect the things above that, right? If you're getting a heavy varroa load, then they're going to affect the queen and the brood and even the amount of food that can be brought in with a reduced population, that sort of thing. In most areas, you probably should have done something about varroa before now. If you've got a warmer fall in your area, you probably still have time to do things. But in most cases, if you were going to do something, you should do something very soon or have already done it, and maybe even follow up as well. We'll talk a little bit about that in one of the Q&A components. So, all right. Just a couple of images. So if you recognize on the treatment, this is Mite Away. This is actually Max Mite Away Quick Strips, not the Formic Pro version. We've been using that for years, and that's kind of what we're happy with and comfortable with. And so there's 2 pads right over a single deep, and we can talk about that, the challenges with that as well. The other is this crazy hive I was talking about. All that's pollen on the front porch. And if I go up to a hive and see that, I think the hive has been robbed, right? That's where they were robbing, and that was the debris. But this crazy hive had stuffed a full box of deep frames with pollen. I could pick up a frame and just turn it over, and pollen would just rain out. So I don't know what was, there was a queen, were some eggs kind of right in the middle, but I think some switch got stuck on to collect pollen and they didn't turn off the switch. So this is kind of what I'm talking about with, in our area, sometimes it can be too much pollen. But okay, let's go to the next one. All right, so we're going to transition now into some of the questions that you had that you submitted to Danny ahead of time, and we collected them into groups, and one of those is mite management. That's an ongoing issue that pretty much most folks in the world are dealing with, and even Australia now. The Varroa had been held at bay there for a long time, but in the last 2-3 years, it's come there now, and they're dealing with it, and it's something that we've been dealing with in the United States since the 80s, and it's really just changed beekeeping drastically from when my dad was keeping bees in the U.S. and North Carolina in the 60s and 70s, and most farmers would have hives, and in the spring you just go put some supers on. Sometime in the summer you pull those off, harvest the honey. I still have very fond memories of a dish pan with this big slab of honey my dad was cutting out and eating that. That's just the best time. And there wasn't much management that you had to do other than harvesting the honey and giving a place for the bees to stay. Next season, they would still be there. They'd be alive. Maybe you lost one to whatever. But again, Varroa might really change the landscape of beekeeping in the U.S. and really around the world. So as a beekeeper, we need to do something about it, be aware of it. And there's lots of debate and different ways of dealing with Varroa, but regardless of how you choose to manage them, you need to manage them somehow and be aware of their biology, their population cycles. That just helps you understand kind of how they interact with your honeybee population. And there's lots of very good research in the last 5 years-ish that have brought to light some of the characteristics of Varroa themselves that are giving us some hope for new treatment strategies or queen breeding. There's a lot of work going on, even in North Carolina, with Varroa sensitivity and hygienic behavior, those sorts of things. So again, there's a lot of work and effort going in to address Varroa mites, and you should pay attention and see what's going on there. So let's talk briefly through some of this, and then I'll point to some resources that I think are very worthwhile and accurate and have a lot of backing scientifically and just good people that were working on those. So the strategies for managing Varroa, again, there are things you can do that get in the way of the Varroa population cycle. So that's sort of physical manipulations. That could be when you split your hives in the spring. In our operation, we heavily split our hives, which pretty much gives a brood break to all the hives, requeening with when we make the splits. And that's kind of a natural Varroa control strategy. Swarming is another example of when that happens. Splitting is just an artificial version of that, right? So a brood break is a way of breaking that population cycle. If you want to nerd out on numbers, then go to Randy Oliver's scientific beekeeping website. He has these population models, spreadsheets showing how the Varroa grows, population grows, and what you're doing when you're doing a brood break is you're breaking that graph, that equation that's growing the Varroa. You're interrupting that. So anything you can do to interrupt that, that's what a lot of the physical manipulation does. drone frames and trapping the varroa in the drone frames, removing those frames, freezing them. Again, that's one of those strategies that's in that category. That takes a good bit of energy and effort to do that as well. So another piece of varroa management is monitoring, and this involves looking at your varroa loads, doing mite washes, either sugar shake, alcohol wash, or dishwashing soap wash, and again, just getting a snapshot in time of what the varroa looks like in your hive, and that's a pretty labor-intensive effort as well, but it can give you good insight into which hives need to be treated or how the varroa load is kind of in your area, in your operation. And there are a lot of tutorials and tools for knowing how to do that. And of course, you're going to, when you're doing inspections, you're going to be looking for evidence of varroa, and that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. As most people know, once you see varroa mites on a bee, then, and if you're seeing a lot of those, your infestation level is pretty high, because a lot of varroa are under the cappings that you're never going to see. And so you really don't want to wait till that stage, but it's something you should be looking for regardless. Suppose you had some unusual circumstance that had a higher varroa load than it should be, then you want to be able to catch that as soon as you can. Now, the other strategy or piece of the puzzle is if I do want to do something to kill varroa mites, right, then there are a number of different treatment strategies. Some of those are on the more organic side, like your formic acid and thymol, and then others are more in synthetics, like your Apivar is in that category. And again, there's different efficacy, there's different requirements, temperature ranges in particular for formic. Any of these that are kind of doing this sort of fumigating sort of thing in the hive, there's some conditions requirements for doing that. So you need to be aware of those and know what works in your area for your conditions. The other place to get information there, as I say in the next the bullet, is that experienced beekeepers in your area. Again, you ought to be involved with the community, talking to folks, understanding what beekeeping is like in your area, how do people deal with varroa, what's been effective, that sort of thing. So that's just a quick overview of varroa management strategies, and there's a lot more there, as you know, and there's full talks and books and things on that. One of the places that you can get really good information, I believe, is the Honeybee Health Coalition. They have both a guide to different sort of varroa management strategies, biology, that sort of thing. And then they have a decision tool as well that you can kind of walk through your current conditions in this decision tool, and it takes you through a sequence of questions, and it ends with a collection of treatment strategies that are appropriate for those conditions that you're in. And on both of those, I was involved in the creation of those, and the groups of people that were working on those, and they're like really good folks that know honeybees and know the science behind it, and I would trust the information that comes from those. So again, a lot of folks would point to the Honeybee Health Coalition collection of information about that for varroa. So, all right, what's next? I feel like I'm talking really fast, but you all seem to be going to town in the chat. So I hope you all having fun over there. I can't read them all, but so the second set of questions were around winterizing your hives, and really I already covered that in a sense that the things that you should be doing in the fall, that's really the preparation for winter. There's nothing really to do at the end, except maybe wrap your hives. But in our operation, we start thinking about winter when we come out of sourwood, which is the end of July. So we're moving hives out of the sourwood yards. That's the last big event for the bees. And if you also think about the calendar, summer solstice is kind of a time when the bees kind of move towards, we're going towards winter now. Winter solstice, they're moving towards summer, right? And they're moving towards flows. And so that the winter solstice, summer solstice are two really big markers in the honeybee's life and biology. And so we're really already going towards winter when you get to the end of July and early August. And so the thing you should be, as a beekeeper, you should be in sync with what the bees are doing, and they're already heading towards winter. So you should be going towards winter with them. And so again, managing your space well, drawing the space down, again, to give them enough, keep it limited so that they can manage the space well. And then food, of course, do they have enough resources to do what they need to do to raise the baby bees for winter, and that includes your pollen and your nectar. Again, we talked about that already. And then the last piece again is you need a strong queen and a good bee population to raise those winter bees, a healthy group of bees to raise the bees that are going to be there for the winter. And so those are the best practices, is having healthy bees, right? And so those are some things that you can do around getting ready for winter. But now there's, in additional considerations, there's all these sort of little details that people like to, should I say, stress over. But the top of this is what's most important. These are lesser importance. If you got the others covered, if you got a good number of bees, you've got them in a good space, dry, they've got good food, and you've got a good healthy population, a lot of these other things are less important and don't become as big of a factor in the bees surviving the winter. Maybe that's the best way to frame it. Now, that being said, there are things we can't control. Maybe there's some iffiness with the food, or we got late on the verbal control. The population is sort of on the edge, right? Some of these other things then might make a difference in the survivability. So again, configuration, get your space as small as possible, in my opinion, to contain to give a good space for the cluster. Okay. Depending on your kind of the bees that you have, like for ours, they'll overwinter in 4 or 5 frames of bees, deep frames, and that's their kind of winter cluster. Other Italians can kind of have bigger clusters, which then means they need more food. Again, so depending on your bees, where you are, those size requirements might be different, but you kind of want it as tight as possible. Even overwintering nukes is reasonable in a lot of places as well. So the hive configuration, how much food, how we touched on that. How many pounds of food do I need, or kilos of food do I need for my area? Again, talk to folks, see what other people do. But again, if I'm overwintering in a single, that means there's a limit to how much food I can have in there, right? But I do want it kind of packed out in that single. If you're in a double, then you're going to have way enough food in most circumstances. If you've got even a reasonable amount of that second deep in food, right? Wrapping hives and wind protection. Wind protection, I think, is kind of if you're in a windy area. I am in the winter. We get the good winter storms and the strong cold fronts come through. So one, for keeping hives from tipping over is one thing. The other is just to keep the wind exposure. If you can, when you're placing your apiary, you should probably even think about that, right? If you've got a strong, say in our area, northwest wind flow, my hives kind of have a bank behind them, and they're facing sort of southeast. And so the wind kind of goes over the top, or some people will put, hay bales or something. I've got friends in Canada and Saskatchewan that, and a lot of them, they overwinter outside, which is crazy because they get to actual minus 40 Fahrenheit Celsius. By the way, did you know that minus 40 is where Fahrenheit and Celsius are the same? That's your trivia for the day. But at that point, it's just really, really cold. Nobody cares that they're the same. But but I see their yards and they have these big hay bales kind of around them for wind protection. Yeah, so I think that can be an important factor. Wrapping hives, that's become a little more popular. I would say definitely in northern tier up in Canada that's necessary. Kind of where I am in North Carolina, I don't think it matters that much. But again, talk to folks, experiment with it, see if it matters for you. Entrance reduction, yeah, probably should reduce it, especially for mice and things like that. It's more for that. This time of year, it might also help with robbing, preventing robbing. Open bottom boards, if you're using those, probably should close those up. I don't think it matters so much, but that's probably the best practice. All right, last one, Danny. So deciding when to combine, this one is kind of a toss-up in the sense that you should take your losses in the fall. A lot of people say that, if you've got a weak hive, don't spend a lot of energy trying to, save it. Maybe that sounds harsh, but you can spend a lot of energy that is not very productive. And so if you do have a hive that's got low resources, a low population, things like that you're asking questions, is this going to make it? Then just toss it on top of another hive. I mean, just combine them. How to combine them? I mean, people, put newspaper or whatever. You can even just put them right on there a lot of the times, but maybe put a barrier in there between them, and to give them some time to get used to each other. But again, there's some of that is less important than we think it is. So, all right. Finally, let's get to next steps in HiveTracks. Okay, so if you're a HiveTracks user, thank you for being on there. And again, if you're not, go get the mobile app. It's free, and just get on there and use it, and get it to be part of your beekeeping operation. And we are continuing to improve it. The mobile app itself is super stable right now, and it's doing a really good job. It's performed great this summer. HiveTracks Pro is something that we released kind of our MVP version at the beginning of the summer. And the difference is HiveTracks Pro is a web application. So it's where you use a browser to log into this platform, the HiveTracks Pro, and it gives a lot of different functionality from the mobile. Think of the mobile as your field level data collection, information gathering, and then the HiveTracks Pro would be where you could go and sit down and have more real estate on your screen. You can do more analysis. It has features that we're very excited about and are continuing to improve upon, and that's you can export your data from there. There are dashboards about what's going on in your operation, kind of, or if you're a hobbyist, you can do this honey story, which kind of adds value, and you can share information with your friends and family about your honey. And so we've really put a lot of energy into that over the summer, and it's been greatly improved over that time window, and it's continuing to be something that we're putting a lot of effort into. There's a group mechanism on there for mentoring, for beekeeping clubs. If you're managing a lot of different locations, it will go in the direction of, if I'm a sideliner beekeeper as well, or a commercial, this is what you would have this for. But for hobbyists as well, it has a lot of cool features that would be useful to you. And then finally, this biodiversity monitoring. You may have seen some of this in some of our messaging or content. We as beekeepers are, and the honeybees that we keep are monitoring the environment around our hives. I mean, we are watching, we look and see, how is the environment affecting our bees' health and the flows and the changes that are going on around us. What's the land use like? What are our bees getting exposed to? As we make observations, as we go through our day, we look at what's blooming. If you haven't had this happen to you yet as a beekeeper, it will. You become sort of a botanist and are very interested in what's blooming and the cycles and the seasons. And so we are capturing that within the platform to give you a way to kind of participate in that and capture that who you are as a beekeeper and what the bees are doing in monitoring the environment. And so stay tuned for that. Uh, the document flora record that's in the app, that's kind of the gateway into that. You may also see that you can add what's called a site and in the app. It's not an apiary, it's just a site. It's a place, maybe it's a park, maybe it's a garden that you want to document what's blooming in that area, how pollinator friendly is it, things like that. So again, stay tuned. That's a direction that we're going in as well. So, all right, what's next? So there's just a couple of slides. This is in HiveTracks Pro. This is the honey story that we have. This is one that we're really excited. I've been wanting this for ages, and it's really a way to tell the story of your honey. How did the honey get to be what it is? And it uses the data that you enter into HiveTracks to tell that story. You can put the content in there as well, and you can tailor it to if I'm giving this to my friends, or if I'm selling this at a farmer's market, or if this isn't a product. The next slide, if you see, we've got this really cool collaboration with a local brewery called Boonshine, where they are using our sourwood honey in this high country honey beer that they make. And we're using that as a proof of concept for authenticating that our honey is sourwood honey in going into this beer. So kind of this supply chain kind of traceability thing that we're doing. So that's something that you should pay attention to and look out for that we're doing as well. All right. So that's the end of my ramblings. And again, thanks everybody for being here, and hopefully we can get to some of these comments. Seems like y'all have been answering each other's questions, which is great.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of them are already covered.
Okay, good.
Maybe a couple more as well. In your direct message, James, maybe we can go through those ones that maybe haven't been as explicitly answered. Let me just stop sharing the screen for a minute, and we can refresh this here.
All right, so let's see. So you want me to just pick out some of these? Let's see.
Yeah, we've also got a couple. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
so okay, I'll pick out a couple. One was, how often do you inspect? That's a great question. And if you want a prototype to follow, the commercial guys, not that you want to be a commercial beekeeper, but their bee health is critical to their business. So I would pay attention to how they keep up with their bees, and 10 to 14 days is kind of how they cycle through their hives. And I think that's a good measure, especially early in the season. Well, once the season starts rolling, then 10 to 14 days. And if you think about the cycles of brood and queens and swarm behavior, within 10 to 14 days, you can kind of catch a lot of things that are going sideways, or that you can preempt something going wrong. So that's just a good rule of thumb. As you get into, say, honey flows, it can be a little different. You don't want to go all the way down in the hive if they're making honey. Yeah, you just want to look in and see how's the honey flow going. Don't tear it all apart. There'll be time for that when you pull honey to see how things shook out in the brood nest and after the honey flow. Let's see. There was a question of when you pull honey and there's not much honey down in the brood nest. That's one of those critical moments, which is a good observation. That's something that you should pay attention to. And the way we run single deeps, that's a risk that we make or take. And when we make honey, so everything above the deep than is a honey super for us. And so that doesn't leave a lot of room for raising brood and storing honey. So we do have to be careful when we pull honey to not have them starve or be resource low, in that interim when we pull that honey. And again, that's one of those things that you need to make note of. Another observation that I had this year in our season, I don't think I said this, but our spring flow in our area was non-existent. It rained for the 3-week window that we should have been making spring honey. So for our beekeeping business, we were down probably 75%, 80% in honey production in that window, which is a big ouch uh, from a business model standpoint. But the bees themselves, sometimes in those situations, they're able to make enough honey for themselves, right? Just to keep themselves going every day, but they're just not able to get ahead and put up the excess honey. And that was something that we were on the edge with, and I was about to feed them even right after it should have been a honey flow, and which is very unusual. But then we got a little burst of a flow, and so they were able to, kind of maintain their population, keep laying. The queen continued to lay. I have seen where if you are in one of those dearths and resources go limited out in the field, the queen can really draw down her queen laying. She can even shut down for a time period if the resources aren't there in the hive or outside. So again, that's one of those things that you really want to monitor. All right, maybe one more question.
Maybe
There's a question. Go ahead.
Oh, we just had one about winter inspections, about how often, or opening and inspecting during at all. I don't think you touched on that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, yeah. So in wintertime, unless you have a good reason, you really shouldn't be in the hive. You should go look. Again, this depends on where you are, the weather conditions, that sort of thing. And I always kind of go, when I'm talking about winter, I reference my Saskatchewan and Alberta folks of, they're in brutal winter. And they, from very soon from now, they're going to have wrapped their hives and put them to bed for winter. And then they don't touch them, for 5 or 6 months. And the bees are fine in that conditions. And so for us in more temperate areas, looking at them in the winter is probably not necessary. Now, if you're in a warm area and they break, it's warm enough and that you can go in, sure, maybe out of curiosity or whatever, or emergency feeding. But really, if you've got enough food going in, then you shouldn't have to worry about the feeding. What you should do in the winter, though, is on a nice warm day, go look at the entrance. Just sit there and watch them and make sure that they're flying well. That's the best indicator that they're still alive. And really, at that point, you're just, are they alive or not is really your question. And there's not a lot you can do clearly if they're not, but record it. That's it. You should be recording the dead out and when you found it, because that can be important just in reflecting on maybe why they died or kind of your postmortem. So, all right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for being here and your attention. I hope it was useful to you. You got something out of it, and we'll do some more of these if you are enjoyed it. And we look forward to talking to you again soon. If you haven't tried the app, do so. If you are using the app, give us feedback. We're always looking for it. Again, I've been at this for 14 years with HiveTracks history, and so I've heard it all, and I'm happy to hear more. And we're continuing to, try to create the best experience for you to help you make good decisions as beekeepers. That's still my quest in life for myself and for you. So we'll keep at it.